We interrupt this podcast for a very special message from Trainmaster GT's sister, Bella, who has something very important to say.
For far too long, Trainmaster GT has asserted a monopoly on Lucky Paper Radio's Hot Takes segment. But you have the power to end the suffering. With just a few short minutes of your time, you could record a hot take and send it to Lucky Paper Radio to end Trainmaster GT's reign of terror. You have the power to make a difference. Record a hot take, save a life.
We don't want to be clipping. There we go. Hi, everybody. Welcome to a brand new episode of Lucky Paper Radio. My name is Andy. I'm here, as always, with my co-host. Anthony uses a light theme in his code editor, Maddox.
Oh God! Now you're gonna get so many people mad at me. This is a rude thing you've done.
I also said code editor. It's a text editor, but people that don't write code, you write code in a white background text.
White text.
It's no, not white text.
That's what I mean. You know, the paper is white. That's how writing works.
It's crazy. It's one of the craziest things about you, to be perfectly honest.
You know, I don't think about it that much. Just go with the default light theme.
It's not the default. It's not the default in anything. It hasn't been the default for 20 years in any text editor.
I have nothing to say for myself.
Do you keep your operating system also in light theme?
I have it in the one where it switches at night.
But you still have a white background text editor at night.
That switches as well, but I just don't usually program at night.
Well, I mean, at least you're not. At least I don't have to deal with the vision of you sitting there, working on some Lucky Paper thing at 10 p.m., staring at a bright white screen, which is
keeps you awake. It's good for you.
Horrifying. It's not good for you.
Gives you that vitamin D, staring at that bright white computer screen.
Vitamin dysfunctional brain for having the wrong color text editor. Oh, Anthony, this is our much-awaited Foundations set review. We have recorded an episode prior, part one of this set review, where we talked about our own interest in the set, the cards we're most excited about for our own cubes, and now it's time to talk about the community's response. This is the responses to the survey we run for every set. We're going to talk about the cards that you, the listeners, are most excited to play in your own cubes, which of course means, Anthony, we are not alone on this episode. We are joined, of course, by Parker, Doctor of Tribology, Lamascus.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here. I feel so relaxed. I'm ready to talk about some Cube.
Congratulations on defending your dissertation. I watched, Anthony and I both watched the dissertation defense, and I gotta say, I think people that listen to this podcast regularly will probably have expected this from you, but as far as dissertation defenses go, which I've seen a few, I think yours was a particularly excellent presentation. You did a really good job making your extremely complex research understandable to me, a big dum-dum that doesn't know anything about friction. And you also had, a literary reference woven throughout that you used a visual signifier to tie together different aspects of the presentation. It was very well considered. Nice job, Parker.
Thank you. And, sincerely, it means a lot that you were both there. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that, Lucky Paper being able to talk about Cube and data to a broad audience was an awesome skill to learn and directly fed into the presentation. So yeah, thanks to the listeners as well for letting me essentially practice talking about data to a broad audience.
Everybody out there can take a little bit of credit for your dissertation.
Absolutely. And I don't just talk about Cube so that it can help me at my work. I do it because it's awesome, but it was a nice bonus.
Well, very glad that you managed to defend successfully. Are you feeling any of the post-doctoral dissertation depression, the dip of what do I do now? I have no purpose anymore?
Postpartum depression?
Yeah,
no, I'm not. I'm instead just thinking about all the Lucky Paper articles that I can finally have time to edit and put together. So, be prepared for maybe some articles in January.
This is the other thing I wanted to acknowledge is that you put together a lovely game for your dissertation defense party, your graduation party, I guess, that we also attended. And the game was Parker-based trivia where all the answers were numbers. And one of the questions was, how many articles have you written for Lucky Paper? Or it was, how many articles have you published about Magic? But I think they're all on Lucky Paper. To my knowledge, you haven't published anything anywhere else. And Anthony and I both dramatically underestimated the number, which was, at time of the game being played, 47. And so we're talking about 48 and 49 right now, your two latest articles. So, I mean, yeah, congratulations on being just incredibly prolific and productive as a person.
Meanwhile, you also did a dissertation. You apparently read a book a week, and long ones, played 1 million hours of video games.
It was very funny to talk to
I don't know how do you do all these things, Parker? It's crazy.
Dark mode, Anthony. Dark mode.
That's the power.
Twice as much time if you activate dark mode.
It was very funny talking to we were in little teams for this trivia game, and I was paired with 3 people that you know through your lab. And so they don't know anything of your non-lab life, basically. And the question was, how many books did Parker read on average since 2019 annually? And I guessed around 1 a week, and they were like, no way. They were like,
that's crazy.
They were like, he's been doing a dissertation. Like, how could he possibly read that much? And I was like, guys, I talked with Parker about Magic cards for probably like 15 hours a week. Like, he's got some time, I know. And they were like, well, if he's doing that, then he can't possibly be reading. And I'm like, I don't know. Anyway. Also, I want to also just air a little grievances here for talking about the trivia game, which is that I was meeting new people, I was socializing, I was being a nice normal person.
Great job, Andy. We're all very proud of you.
One of the questions was, Parker played the bass drum in the high school marching band, college marching band. What was it?
High school
marching band. And the question was, name either of the 2 sizes in inches of bass drum that Parker played, and my team of ding-dongs, the numbers they were saying is, I said at most 36 was like the biggest I could go. I'm like, that's a huge drum. There's no way it was bigger than 36. And the other 3 people on the team guessed 48, 44, and 52. And I was like, y'all are so wrong, but I will go with the democracy of the team. And we said a big number, and sure enough, it was what? It was like 24 and 28 were the 2 sizes, or 28 and 32?
Yeah, that's correct. 24, 28.
Yeah. 52-inch drum. Can you imagine a 52-inch bass drum?
Yes, I can.
You could live inside of that.
I have a vivid imagination.
Yeah, anyway. There's some Japanese micro hotels which have rooms smaller than that bass drum.
Yeah, precisely. Anyway, congratulations again, Parker. It was so fun to see you at the end of your long journey and get to clear view into the work you've been doing on oxide powders as additives to lubricants to improve efficiency and reduce wear.
Yeah, thank you. A PhD is a long journey, and especially having done this during the pandemic, there were some dark days in there, but Lucky Paper was always a bright spot in that. So I appreciate you both a lot.
And you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, now we're talking about feelings. Time to talk about Magic cards.
All right.
We have the results of our Foundation survey, and we're going to talk about the top 8 cards from the survey, though, as always, we'll recommend that anybody interested go check out the article on the website where you can see the full results, the long tail of all the cards people are interested in for all of their weird, unique cubes. We'll also touch briefly on Foundation's Jumpstart, which has one outlier people are especially interested in, and some opinions about some of the cards over there as well in the aggregate. And then we have a ton of hot takes. You have responded beautifully to my request that Trainmaster GT be joined by others in the hot takes department, and I think you'll find the episode is better for it, so hopefully everyone can just maintain this enthusiasm for sending in hot takes, so this episode can really be about getting the community's voice out there instead of just our dumb voices. I guess we got to start by explaining what the survey is. Take it away, Parker.
All right.
That's Dr. Parker.
Take it away, Dr. Parker.
No, please. I would go crazy, I think. Okay, so for every survey that we do, we send the survey to the Cube community, and we ask Cube owners and respondents to answer 2 questions. Number 1, what cards are you testing from the set? And then number 2, how enthusiastic are you about those cards on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest? And that can be, like, we're really just rating enthusiasm. It can be whatever criteria you want. Some people, talk mostly about power level with that rating, but others talk about the aesthetic fit and, whether the power level is right for their environment, or even just like, do I like the art or whatever. In fact, we frequently get comments in our open response section where people are like, I would have rated this a 10, but I didn't like the art or whatever. And so it's really those 2 questions. What cards are people interested in, and how enthusiastic are they about them? And we compile those results, write it into an article, and that's what we'll discuss today.
Shall we just start with number 8 then?
Well, I think before we do, we should just mention a couple things about the set broadly. So This is mostly a reprint set, Foundations, but it does have 139, I think, unique new cards. So this is a little smaller than normal. And despite that, our respondents were quite enthusiastic about this set. It seems like the median cubist who responded to our survey is testing 6 cards from Foundations, and they're giving about 1 card a high rating above like 7.75. And if you were to scale this up, if you were to like scale up the 139 cards to a full set, this would be per capita the most popular standard legal set of 2024. So it punches like well above its weight class in terms of popularity. Yeah, I think we'll see why when we talk about these cards individually.
Yeah, it is important to remember this is, as far as new cards go, a really tiny set. We're talking closer to, like, honestly, a couple commander deck precons in terms of number of unique cards rather than an actual standard legal set. So I think, superficially looking at the numbers, it seems like it's not that popular, but to your point, Parker, per unique card, it's overwhelmingly popular as a set. And we've heard anecdotally from talking to Cube designers, too, that a lot of people are really excited about this set. And I got to say, too, I've been, I monitor the Discord and the subreddit and stuff to see what's going on, broadly speaking, in like the Cube world, and there's a lot of people I see are getting into Cube by taking the Foundation's Jumpstart product and basically using it as a foundation to then build their own cube and just start modifying. So I think it's going to be a landmark set for our format, and we'll look back on this as an important moment for Cube.
Mm-hmm. And I think what you're talking about there with like the starter, they have a product called a starter collection, and it's 270-ish cards.
Yeah.
That includes basic lands, but is a perfect singleton, very bread and butter environment. It's also quite affordable. And that combo of having cards that are affordable, easy to build on top of, very classic Magic flavor. I mean, it's got me thinking about getting one myself, just as so I can have an environment to teach people with or to use when I'm building other environments. It's just such a interesting and historically unique product, it feels like.
Yeah, honestly, I kind of feel like whether Wizards of the Coast is saying it or not, it's kind of like the closest thing to a Cube product that Wizards of the Coast has ever sold. So, great way to get into the format, I think, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Henry Clay, 1844 here with the Foundation's hot take. Most of you shouldn't update your cubes at all for this. You should do less. You should go play Hearts. You should go play Spades, other card games, Pokemon, play with friends. Foundations will be around with us for a long time to build with, to design with. Building new relationships with your friends will outlast that by a good distance.
Let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into the top 8 cards from Foundation's foremost Cube designers. Number 8 is a common Goblin Surprise. It's 2 and a red for an instant. Choose one. Creatures you control get +2/+0 until end of turn, or create 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens.
I'm confused by this card for
Why?
a very specific reason, which is this is a functional reprint. This card already existed. It was just called You See a Pair of Goblins and had a little extra flavor text.
Yeah, but also people had strong feelings about the cards from the what was the D&D set called again? I can't remember.
Forgotten Realms.
Adventures in Forgotten Realms. They had feelings about the cards from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms that were worded like you do something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like You See a Pair of Goblins. I think the fact that this is getting a reprint that is much more normal and like Foundations coded, I think it's not a surprise to see this up here given that.
It's literally a Goblin Surprise, Andy.
Yeah, I mean, it is worth noting, this is definitely by far the highest that a functional reprint has ever scored on our survey. The vast majority of people just completely ignore them. I imagine a lot of people honestly don't even know this is a functional reprint. To be perfectly honest, I didn't notice it first until I was searching for similar cards like it for my
good news for
Sacred
you.
Geometry cube. Well, I don't want functional duplicates, but I think it's a beautiful card and also emblematic of what this set is all about, right? Like this very basic effect, 2 1/1 goblins, and this modality of if you already have a big board, this turns into like a little mini Anthem effect for a turn, versus if you need to actually build your board out, it's a slightly overcosted way to make 2 tokens. Just impeccably clean.
It also it's an instant, and so you could build out your board, yes, but you could also surprise an attacker.
Hence
so
the
it's
surprise.
even got a third mode. Yeah.
And honestly, like I love when the names of cards connect to the mechanics that way. Like, one of my favorite all-time cards has got to be Think Twice. I think it's just so elegant. The fact that it's called Think Twice and you cast it twice. It's also fun to cast it the first time and say Think Once, and then you cast it again and you say Think Twice. And the fact that this is actually got Surprise in the name, I don't know, it's a beautiful little elegant package, which you see a pair of goblins is just simply not as elegant and tidy.
I mean, I appreciate that on You See a Pair of Goblins. The illustration matches kind of the very not very exciting card name as well. It's just like, here's some goblins making a goblin face.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I totally agree. This is like a much more flavorful, tidier implementation of this card. It was just a little bit surprising to me because we don't usually see functional reprints.
For sure, that is definitely notable.
Much attention. So yeah, I mean, I guess I wonder how many people are like deliberately making a choice like, now I'm interested in this card because all those details are just a little cleaned up for me, or people just, hadn't seen that card before, or it could be people are sticking really tightly to Singleton and just really want multiples of this effect.
I could see one in
all
multiples
of these
for
things
sure.
could be the case.
It's also a rarity downshift.
That's a good point.
Is it?
Possible that some
that's a
popper
bigger deal,
designers are
honestly.
interested. Yeah.
That's probably actually the biggest contributing factor. I didn't realize it was an uncommon in Adventures in the Forgotten Realms.
Leave it to Dr. Parker.
Yeah, I think, to me, I think of all cards now as existing on this spectrum of feeling like Magic cards versus not feeling like Magic cards. And, on the extreme not feeling like Magic cards side, you have like SpongeBob's Secret Lair, that kind of like really over the top stuff.
Transformer, a Spider-Man.
Right. And then on the extreme feels like Magic side, you have these Foundations cards, right? These to me are like the most quintessential like core set, like Magic-y Magic cards. And to me, like, You See a Pair of Goblins is like somewhere kind of in the middle, maybe even like trending a little bit towards feeling less like a Magic card, given that it was, technically a little bit of a different IP, though obviously Dungeons & Dragons is very related to Magic, and the naming convention was so different, it just feels a little off. It's got that stink on it, that stink of being a little different, which Goblin Surprise just straight down the middle. Love to see it.
Next up, number 7 in our rankings is Kiora the Rising Tide. This is 2 and a blue for a 3/2 legendary Merfolk Noble. When Kiora enters, draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards, and has Threshold. Whenever Kiora attacks, if there are 7 or more cards in your graveyard, you may create Scion of the Deep, a legendary 8/8 blue octopus creature token. I definitely see why people are interested in this card. It's sort of like, what is Joe Donkey calling these now? Lunchables, the card that kind of just like brings all the components to do its little synergy all by itself.
Yeah, can you fill me in on this? Because I picked up on like the end of this conversation in the Discord. I saw somebody being like, well, this card's a Lunchable, right? And everyone was like, totally. And
absolutely.
I was like, what?
And you're like, am I having
I
a
missed what a
stroke?
Lunchable is.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that. It's a card that has all the components like in little boxes in a pre-packaged thing. This is maybe not the most extreme example of that. But
I mean, separate abilities that are very synergistic with each other and make the card a self-contained engine without needing
I would call it a
external stuff.
Ragadraga, maybe.
Wow, I love language and its malleability. It's really beautiful.
But I see why people are interested in this card. It's like at a space rate, just a cheap creature that does a little bit of card selection and fills up the graveyard, and then the payoff for doing self-mill. I feel like self-mill is a thing that a lot of cube designers often have a little bit of interest in, but maybe it doesn't actually come together so easily all the time. But this is a pretty clean payoff.
Yeah, if it wasn't for the unique token, I think I'd be all over this for my own simple cube, in which I have drawing and discarding themes in blue.
I think it's worth asking, though, like, how often are you actually going to create that 8/8? And that's part of what I like about this design is that Threshold, as opposed to like Delirium or something that's often easier to achieve, it's not going to happen that often. You might have Delve spells in your self-mill deck or other, like, there might be opposing Grave Hate. So it's just not going to be every game that you make an 8/8, and that's going to make the 8/8 feel special and like a dream kind of worth chasing. And it also is a way of kind of self-regulating the power level, because an 8/8 is very hard to deal with in a low power format, but that's also the same format where Threshold might be harder to meet. Whereas a fetch land format that's got, tons of Thought Scour effects and so on, may be easier to make an 8/8, but there's also more fatal pushes and, bounce removal or whatever running around. I think it's very flexible.
Something else I really like about this card is some tech that I feel like I've seen on more cards recently, which is cards that repeatedly make tokens, but the token is legendary.
Yeah.
Which I think is a really nice way of, I think back to like Ophiomancer style effects, where it's like you can only have one snake at a time, and the way they did it is on your upkeep, if you don't have a snake, you make a snake, and it's like, okay, that kind of works until you have a changeling or something else, and then it just breaks. And this idea that the token is legendary, I think, is both really cool and flavorful, especially for a big token like this. The fact that it's a giant thing, and it's probably got a cool looking token with
I was
cool
just
art
going
on
to
it.
say, that's a pretty cool illustration on the Scion of the Deep.
It is cool flavorfully, and then also it's great mechanically, right? Like you mentioned Fatal Push or a bounce spell. I imagine most of the time you're playing against this, first of all, you want to Fatal Push Kiora if you have the choice, obviously. But if they get that first token, I think you're probably in a space where you're like, I'm actually not going to answer that if I can. I'm just going to try and chump block it or like get around it, because if they can just make another, then it's not worth spending a removal spell on. But now you just have this one thing you have to kind of answer or like play around. I think it's a really elegant way to make things that can provide repeatable value, but are not likely to like snowball out of control because there's a ceiling on it.
I also love how to create an 8/8 and kind of meet the ceiling on Kiora, you have to put your game piece at risk. You have to attack with her.
Mm-hmm.
And she's only got 2 toughness. She'll trade with, a lot of things in combat. And so, yes, you get an 8/8, but you have to kind of weigh that cost benefit. Is it worth using an evasion spell or a removal spell to save my Kiora to, retain the ability to make an 8/8 later, a second 8/8 if the first one dies? There's some real decisions there, and I think it's really cool.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think very often these days we just see when you attack rather than that actual creature that has the ability needing to be the thing that attacks. And I like that tension a lot more, that you actually have to get into combat with this. And I
Somewhere
think
out there, Ollie's cheering for you right now.
that play pattern of, I'm just going to, get in with this and you can block with your 5/5, whatever. I have an 8/8 I can attack with next turn. Means that your removal spell for the 8/8 actually does matter. It's not just like there's infinite Scion of the Deep coming for you.
And with 3 power, it'll trade up too. Like if they don't have a cheap little thing to throw in front of it, they might have to sacrifice a 3 or 4 drop to actually trade with it.
And I should mention this is being tested by 20%, so a fifth of the people that respond to the survey, with a sort of medium rating of 6.2.
Oh, I forgot to say the Goblin Surprise testing. So the Goblin Surprise, the previous card, being tested by 17.5%, but with a ranking of 7.2, which is the highest among the top 8 cards we're discussing today, and among the highest for the entire set with a few outliers.
Going back to Goblin Surprise, I think that does speak to it being a new effect in Pauper.
Yes, for sure.
That seems correlated.
Hello everybody, my name is Trailblazer GT, and this is my main Magic the Gathering Foundations hot take. I do not think it would be a controversial statement to say that Foundations is the best new player set of all time. By emphasizing making the cards fun instead of overly simple, Foundations has managed to become the best core set compared to any of its predecessors. But to me, the most important thing about this set is not what's in it, but rather what wasn't. Basically every other set released this year has had a ton of cards that don't make any sense to be in the set outside of the context of Commander. Murders at Karlov Manor was full of cards that didn't make any sense outside of your command zone, while Outlaws at Thunder Junction contained an overwhelming 43 legendary creatures, many of which didn't even really fit the themes of the set and were just there because they'd be good for Commander. Foundations breaks this trend. While the set still has a lot of legendary creatures, they are noticeably less oriented around Commander than the legends in the other sets from this year. Instead, most of these cards are formatted for one-on-one play, some of which aim more for competitive players, and others which end up being fun casual build-arounds for good old 60-card casual constructed, like so many of us used to play as kids. In fact, this entire set seems to be mostly devoid of cards that only work in multiplayer, and instead just focuses on good, clean designs that make sense in one-on-one formats. Wizards of the Coast have stated that they want to make Standard a more central part of Magic again. Foundation shows that Wizards have not forgotten how to make a good Standard first set. When you couple the awesomeness of Foundations with the recent announcement that Universes Beyond sets are all going to be full-sized Standard legal products instead of basically small Commander sets, I think there's a very good chance that Standard is going to retake the throne as the heart of Magic. If this ends up happening, I think this will be a good thing for Magic, as it means there will be fewer competing goals between cards. While I expect Commander to still play a big part of Magic's future, I think sets not having to cater specifically to Commander in order to sell will be a net positive thing for Cube designers. Thank you for listening.
But speaking of threats that have to attack, that brings us to our number 6 most popular card from Foundations. This is Sphinx of Forgotten Lore. 2 blue for a creature Sphinx. It is a flash flying 3/3, and it has the ability, whenever this creature attacks, target instant or sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback until end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to that card's mana cost. It's tested by almost a quarter of our respondents with an average rank of 6.2. So we have, I don't know, I've been thinking of it as kind of a mix of subtlety and Snapcaster Mage. I love, again, like Kiora, this creature must attack in order to get value, or in order to get maximum value, let's say. Like the pattern with control threats, like one of our hot takes mentions, is so often about just like never tapping out on the opponent's turn, always like holding up things at instant speed, ambushing attackers with your flash threats. Sphinx of Forgotten Lore does some of that because it's a flash flyer, but a 3/3 body is quite modest and possibly will trade down if, for example, you're playing against aggro. And then also, once it's gotten onto the battlefield, in order to get more value, you have to put it at risk. You have to, tap your blocker and give up on the chance of blocking. You have to spend mana on your own turn. And I think all of those things make it not only a fun and kind of like live the dreamy control finisher, but also a really healthy control finisher.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about forcing you to use your mana on your turn means this isn't just like a really hard, I just like want all counter spells and one threat kind of card. This is going to play well with a lot of removal and, red burn spells, things like that. I think it reminds me most of any card is Kess, Dissident Mage, which again just lets you cast a bunch of instant sorceries out of your graveyard. And
Kess isn't the kind of card where, okay, maybe you want a lot of creature removal, but you'll also flashback card draw spells quite happily. You might flashback a Thought Seize, depending on the situation. So Kess is not compressing deck building down to one single type of instant. And I think Sphinx does the same thing, where it's like, depending on the situation, you might want to use your graveyard like a toolbox and get the right tool for the job. And that has implications for deck building too.
I have a lot of thoughts about this card. And the first one is that I just somehow completely overlooked this in my own review of the set for my own simple cube, and then it wasn't until I heard a hot take about it and looked at the results of our survey that I was like, yeah, this card's amazing. I'm obsessed with it. It's really cool. So just something I completely overlooked, and a testament to the utility of our own survey, because I use it to find a card, even though it's the survey that I help run.
But in the right way, we all know what that means. It's time for another Lucky Paper Radio survey. I think this set's Foundations is surprisingly good. I've started thinking that I should just keep my cube stable and update it less, make less sweeping changes, and I am doing that. But Foundations managed to have some clean designs that I really like. Specifically, I'm looking at Scythecat Cub, Sphinx of Forgotten Lore, and Searslicer Goblin. The Goblin has just the cleanest raid trigger you've ever seen in your life. It's just really annoying, it's straightforward, and it's going to cause some issues. I think the Cub is like Bristly Bill, but without being a cowboy. And I managed to get one somewhat cheaply, so I'm going to be playing that. The Sphinx, I think, is the coolest card in the set. It is just the perfect kind of Snapcaster Mage. It does similar things, but it forces you to be more proactive because the flashback is only proactive, and I really like that. Having a control win condition that literally says on the card, attack with me, is beautiful design, and I don't want to rate the cards too highly, but I think I rated this one the highest that I recently should.
I think the point about this like somehow being more high risk or like less of a like dedicated full-on control card because you have to actually cast spells on your own turn, I don't know that I buy that. Even a like dedicated draw-go control deck is going to have a bunch of cheap cantrips and stuff, and by the time you have 4 mana, you can definitely cast a cheap spell and also hold up a counter spell. So I think this can perfectly fit in a draw-go control style deck without any issue. And to that point, the sort of holding up a flash creature to then block something in combat, that's a play pattern that I actually find, for better or worse, and I think it might be for better, comes up less often with these blue flash threats than with other flash threats, because if your opponent just attacks before doing anything, as they often will, it's rare that spells are cast before combat unless there's a really good reason to do so, then if you got a counterspell in hand and 4 mana up and this in hand, there's got to be a really appealing creature for you to eat in combat for you to be willing to roll this out for that utility, and instead of not holding up a counterspell, because that counterspell being held up is so valuable. So I think there's a lot of times where you will have your opponent go to combat, swing with a couple of things you have very favorable blocks against, and you'll choose not to flash this in. Second main phase, they either won't cast anything or they won't cast anything as worth a counterspell, and then you'll still flash this in on end step and then untap and get value from it. I think that's actually probably going to be a more common play pattern than ambushing something in combat if this is in a deck with a lot of counter magic.
Sure. I think maybe a more precise way of like making the point that I was trying to make was that I agree that this could be appealing in a draw-go control deck, but as a cube designer, I like it precisely because it makes the draw-go play patterns less extreme. That can be a frustrating thing to play against. I've been, frustrated by playing against such decks myself, and I know that some of my players feel the same way. And having a draw-go control threat that sometimes means they tap a little bit of mana on their own turn. Now it doesn't represent 2 counterspells. Now it represents only 1 counterspell. And so you can play around it better. You can force through a threat a little easier. It just, to me, is more satisfying and feels better to play against.
And that's the beauty of the diversity of Cube, because I, as a Cube designer, adore draw-go control. And I really like when super hard control decks are part of my environment. And here, I look at that same play pattern, and I'm like, okay, well here, when you flash this in on end step and then don't have a counterspell in hand, this will help you find your counterspell by casting a Ponder on your combat step when you attack with it, and then having that counterspell up for your opponent's turn. So I agree, it does a lot. It's really flexible, and just an elegant design. It's among the more wordy cards, I think, in Foundations, and it is a mythic rare, so that makes sense, but it is a tidy, resonant package. So
absolutely.
Very cool. Very into it.
To paraphrase Mark Rosewater, Foundations is not the simplest it can be, but it is striving to be the most flavorful it can be. Players are drawn to the depth of Magic the Gathering, and this is the first core set that has come close to finding the balance of interest and accessibility. There are more compelling designs at all weights for a broader spectrum of cubes than almost any other set in recent memory. To paraphrase Mark again, though, rares are generally for constructed these days. Many rares and Foundations are sharp power spikes, lopsiding an otherwise interactive environment with cards like Akroma's Memorial, Bloodthirsty Conqueror, or Sire of Seven Deaths. Most of the long-term winners will be in the realm of clean commons, streamlined uncommons, and a few succinct rares like Searslicer Goblin. We'll still be cubing with Stab and Cephalid Inkmage long after Spinner of Souls and Herald of Eternal Dawn have faded into memory.
The card that is 5th most popular amongst our survey cube designers from Foundations is Sun-Blessed Healer. This is 1 and a white for a 3/1 creature, human, cleric with lifelink. It also has Kicker for 1 and a white. When this creature enters, if it was kicked, return target non-land permanent card with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So either a 2 mana 3/1 with lifelink or a 2 white 4 mana 3/1 with lifelink that also brings back any non-land permanent, mana value 2 or less. You can get back your Portable Hole or your Retrofitter Foundry they disenchanted or whatever. It's being tested by, again, 25% of our respondents with an average rake of 6.5. Really all the ratings, up here in the sort of top section with the exception of Goblin Surprise as kind of a standout on the high end are, firmly in the middle to positive. I don't think really that notable in terms of the differences between them.
I think that's right. So we've got a Blade of the Sixth Pride with lifelink and some late game utility if you draw it on turn 4 and want to spend all your mana on it. I don't know that I love the Blade of the Sixth Pride with lifelink mode very much, personally. I find that it often trades down with a 1/1 token, which is disappointing. The 3/1 lifelink body is can be a little polarizing or swing a race in a way that could be unfavorable from a design perspective. Obviously not from a gameplay. If I'm casting it and winning a race because of lifelink, I love that. But as a designer, I'm not quite so sure.
I will say, as far as bodies I want lifelink on, 3/1 is near the top of the list because this will trade with anything in combat. And so very often it's really going to be a gain 3 life and your opponent sacrifices the creature that they, least care about dying in combat. It's not actually going to very often snowball and gain you a ton of life unless you're already way ahead on board, in which case, that play pattern is not great. If they have no blockers and you're getting to bash for 3 every turn and also just got something back, that can definitely be very polarizing. But as a notorious lifelink disliker, this is, I think, one of the least offensive implementations because 3/1s trade down so easily.
On the other hand, on defense, I think that this can definitely trade up. You know, if somebody has cast their big 4/3 and you want to be able to trade with it, I think that this is going to really shine in cubes that have like a grindy value, like black-white deck especially, that's, you know, getting back their Blood Artist and also putting another body in play that can trade with things and kind of win that long game. But I think I agree. I think a lifelink 3/1 is kind of a place I do like it. I have currently in my cube Phyrexian Missionary, which is a 2/3 with lifelink, and that's really
a much more toxic
can tie up a board
line,
state in a big way. So I could see making that swap in my cube.
Actually, that's a really good comparison. I like how that Phyrexian, whose name you just said, it has a black kicker cost, which is like,
I do like the off-color kicker there, yeah.
I like that play pattern a lot. I love how it's like, it raises the value of one of your off-color bounce lands or whatever. But as an overall package, Sunblessed Healer is a lot more healthy than that, for sure.
And I think part of the reason for the lifelink here is that life gain is very much a theme in white of this set, which,
True.
You know, I've been working on my own simple cube, which I'm calling Sacred Geometry, and there's a lot of justification. I can imagine the conversations they had at R&D. As much as I am a life gain disenjoyer, it makes a lot of sense to me in the foundation set that it is kind of like a core thing to white's color identity, right? Like, it's honestly, black gets some in the form of, like, you know, a vampirism, you know, sucking life away from your opponent, but it is one of the cleanest sort of color pie staples of like what white can do in Magic that I think makes a lot of sense to include. And I gotta say, Anthony, the perfect card for my Sacred Geometry cube occurred to me that made me much more excited about things like Joust Through, which have incidental, you know, gain 1 life, or the random life linker here and there. Do you want to guess what it is? I bet you could figure it out if you thought really
Johnny's
hard.
Pridemate.
No, definitely not a Johnny's Pridemate.
Then I have no idea.
Though honestly, it's in kind of a similar space to a Johnny's Pridemate, but it's one of your favorite cards.
White Main Lion.
Archangel of Thune.
Archangel of Thune. That's a hell of a card.
Archangel of Thune, when you have a Joust, ooh, so
just
good.
Says, if you gain life, you win the game.
I mean, maybe. You need to do some board, too. And also your opponent. See, I'm putting it in a cube where you also have a bunch of board wipes, so you just blow the board up. It'll be fine.
I mean, speaking of a Johnny's Pridemate, I totally loved that card when I was starting Magic. Like, I think for the first 4 years of playing Magic, I never didn't have a deck with a Johnny's Pridemate in it. I built around that card so often. And I think it's because, number one, if you're somewhat new to Magic, well, the way you lose the game is typically by losing your life total. And so gaining life is a way to stop myself from losing, which feels really good. But then also a Johnny's Pridemate gets big, which is appealing for the Timmy Tammy like psychographic. It also ends games, which is sometimes a weakness of lifelink. If you don't have, like, if your entire board is just 1/1s and one a Johnny's Pridemate, at least you know which creature to attack with, and it doesn't lead to as much board stall, unless both players have one, I guess. A Johnny's Pridemate is just, I think, a really healthy payoff if we're going to go down the life gain route. And it makes sense for me that Foundation's, you know, meant for not only new players, but also maybe new to standard players or new to 1v1 Magic. It's important to have some on-ramps for that. Things that are intuitively appealing, and deck building is, you know, kind of spelled out for you, and also counterplay is spelled out. The best way to beat an Ajani's Pridemate is to kill it before it gets big. And it doesn't take, you know, a modern grinder to find that line of play. And so it leads to a sense of discovery and a sense of, you know, kind of deepening your mastery of the game.
Honestly, listening to you talking about Ajani's Pridemate has me plotting on if I can figure out a way to make life gain a theme in my Sacred Geometry cube in a way that comports with my preferences for play, that does not lead to any of the, I think, somewhat toxic play patterns that life gain can lead to. And I mean, Joust Through it is from this set, right? Am I wrong about that?
It is.
It's just not very high on our survey. You all are sleeping on Joust Through. It's so cool. Joust Through is this just 1 mana, 3 damage, you target attacking or blocking creature, and you gain 1 life. That's the perfect example of the kind of card that I think fits just perfectly in with everything we're talking about. It gives you 1 life. It's not going to swing a race. It's not going to, like, 95% of the time actually change your opponent's clock or whatever. It's a single life. But it serves as a trigger for your Johnny's Pridemate, a trigger for your Archangel of Thunes. It, like, makes the sort of archetype sing a little bit without having any of that snowballing, race-ruining potential that repeated life gain has. You got me thinking about that now, because Primate it's such an iconic and elegant card, and it is not a lunchable. It's just a 2/2 that doesn't have any life gain on it at all.
It's just a slice of bologna.
It's just a slice of bologna. You got to find a piece of awful cheese and a stale cracker to put it on. It's Andy from the editing booth, here to say that since we recorded this, I did go through Scryfall and do a couple searches to try and find potential incremental life gain that could slot into my own Sacred Geometry cube to satisfy the goals I mentioned here, and I got to shout out R&D because I honestly have not looked in detail at the reprints in this set, and I don't play Retail Limited at all, but card after card that I found that seemed like it fit my personal life gain tastes and preferences was also reprinted in Foundations. I'm talking about stuff like Leonin Vanguard, Inspiring Overseer, Linden Steadfast Queen, Scavenging Ooze, Tetyova Benthic Druid. Even one new one I didn't notice, Dazzling Angel, is a nice role player in this archetype. Plus the ETB Ganalife lands. I wonder if I could make at least one of those playable in this cube, which is at a much higher power level than Foundations itself. Anyway, shout out to the designers and developers behind Foundations for perhaps already doing this thing that I described maybe wanting to do with my own cube.
All right, should we move on to Kellan Planar Trailblazer? It's 1 red mana for a 2/1 legendary creature, human fairy scout. It has the ability 1 and a red. If Kellan is a scout, it becomes a human fairy detective and gains whenever Kellan deals combat damage to a player, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. And then a second ability for 2 and a red. If it's a detective, it becomes a 3/2 human fairy rogue and gains double strike. Boy, there are a lot of creature types on this card, but basically this is like a Figure of Destiny type card where you can level it up, activating the abilities. They only do anything if you're doing them in the right order. So first it gives you the ability to play cards off the top of your library when it deals combat damage, and then it gets bigger and gains double strike, so you can exile even more cards. This is being tested by 25% of the people that responded to the survey with a similarly, sort of lukewarm rating of 6.8. I'm a little bit surprised to see this not being tested by more people, just because I've seen a lot of chatter about it in cube circles, but it is a little bit wordy, and I'm definitely personally not into the cowboy hat, so I don't know. What do you guys think?
I thought this would be higher in the survey as well. I thought this would be a more popular card. We often see that the new swath of 1 mana red 2/1s with massive upside tend to be quite popular. I think historically they're a little bit controversial, but we do see, Figure of Destiny is still in a lot of cubes despite being a kind of old card. The kind of 1-drops that are great on turn 1 and also perfectly serviceable if you draw them late because you can dump a lot of mana into them tend to be fairly popular cube cards. Yeah, I kind of thought this would be higher. What I see when looking at this is, I don't love the cowboy hat. And honestly, based on the anecdotal responses from our survey on Outlaws at Thunder Junction, that could be a major thing keeping this card down. It would not be surprising if that was a big part of the reason that more people aren't testing this card. It does not read elegantly, which sticks out like a sore thumb in this set because so many of the cards are beautifully elegant. But this type of leveling mechanic, they honestly have not, in my opinion, hit on a version of it that is just resonant and works. The actual level up cards are close, except the rules text box I think is hard to grok and requires learning how it functions if you are new to the game or haven't seen that card type before. And also the fact that it starts on level 0 is extremely unintuitive. Everyone, the first time they play a level up card, thinks, all right, I'll pay 1 and level it up to 2. And it's like, actually, it's on 0 until you pay 1 to put it on 1. For those reasons, that particular implementation is not perfect. And then this one uses the same sort of implementation we see on the Wardens of the First Tree and the Figures of Destinies of the world, which is that it keeps changing its stupid creature type all over the place, but that's just a means to make sure that you're activating these in the right order. You can't just, jump from the 2/1 to the last mode, which obviously it makes sense mechanically, but especially given that this already has a 5-word type line, and then you're appending more, so the second one it becomes another 3. So yeah, it's like the number of words on this card that relate to its type line is 12. It's like just too much about the type line going on here.
Yeah, I mean, I also feel like the Figure of Destiny has a little bit of a narrative to it. It's just gaining more creature types. And it's like, okay, this creature is growing and experiencing. And here it's like, I guess you're doing the same thing because you're going out and becoming a detective.
Also becomes a fairy with no flying.
You have to have read this story.
Well, I didn't.
You know what? Figure of Destiny, the story is on the card.
Yeah, that's right, Anthony. Get his ass. Figure of Destiny's got the story right there. I don't have to read a book to care about Figure of Destiny.
Well, I agree with you. I'm just saying Kellan has been the mascot for this last year of, storytelling. He was on, was it Wilds of Eldraine as a scout? And then he went to Karlov Manor and became a detective. And then he went to Thunder Junction and became a rogue. So, look, I get the story. It's not as elegant as it could be, but it's there nominally. I will say though, I think the mechanics hang together just a little bit better than it might first seem. So you read the abilities once, and then you realize, oh, once I have double strike, I get to impulsive draw 2 cards if I deal combat damage. And that kind of self-synergy is quite appealing. It's a way, it's like a reason to spend the 3 mana that's like even above just, oh, I have nothing else to do with my mana. You might actually just want to see what happens when you get 2 triggers. So that part I think is pretty healthy and pretty like something I wouldn't mind seeing in a cube. The complexity does weigh against that though.
I also got to say, I think the anecdotal takes I've heard of this card, I think people are too high on it from a power level perspective. I don't think this card is that good. And the reasons are, well, number one, it needs to be said, it's kind of obvious if you've played these kind of cards before, but paying 2 mana into this thing's ability just for it to eat a removal spell is not good. Like, that means you've spent 3 mana on a card that could die to half of a lava dart or whatever. That's a pretty rough play pattern that will put you decently behind on tempo, and it will be pretty common because this is just something you play out, you have to wait to untap with it, then you attack with it. So it will be a real choice on turn 2 if you want to level this up, or if you want to actually commit your mana to another card to the board. And you might get punished for making the wrong choice there, depending on what your opponent has. It's also worth noting that if you're leveling this up to the 3rd level, then you're not spending the mana on the cards you're impulsively drawing, right? Like, you would need to have so many additional resources to be doing both of those things, to be like hitting regularly and impulsive drawing cards and casting them, and then also having mana left over to make it the 3rd mode. Like, I think that 3rd level is really rarely going to actually matter, because also if you're just hitting your opponent repeatedly and impulsively drawing cards off the top of their deck, why do you need double strike? That's going to come up maybe if you're in like a board stall where you can't attack, and the 3-power first strike double strike, the 3-power double strike is going to make a huge difference on how the creature lines up in combat. But I don't know, I think it's ultimately like, I'm in my head comparing it pretty closely with Zurgo Bellstriker in terms of power level. And I think people will be shocked to hear me say that, because I think that's a card that people have largely forgotten about. They think it's like an old card that doesn't really hold up to like modern power level. But I genuinely think the dash on Zurgo Bellstriker as the like late game option compared to drawing Kellan on turn 5 and just dumping a bunch of mana into him, I think they're very similar in terms of how much they're going to matter and like swing games.
I agree. Like, on the other hand, how many times have you seen an 8/8 Figure of Destiny? Like,
too many times.
Often, well, okay, fair. But often
sometimes
it's in those board stall situations, right? Like, that's what the last ability is for on that card. And maybe it's the same way with Kellan, where it's like it's intended for the board stall, but there is a little bit of a dream to live.
I will say the big thing about Figure of Destiny to me is that leveling up Figure of Destiny represents a like onboard answer to toughness-based removal, which this does not, right? Like, you could go up 1 power of toughness after you've dumped an additional 5 mana into it. Sometimes it can be hard to find the right spot to remove a Figure of Destiny, right? You have to actually play a game of chicken and get your opponent to move to activate it first, because your toughest-based removal is not going to work if it actually gets to level up. And that will not be a problem here. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Wardens of the First Tree and the Figure of Destinies do sometimes get to those late stages, is because they are actually much harder to answer with toughest base removal, where this never is.
I think that's fair.
Hey Andy, this is Princess Boywife, she, her, aka Avery on the Cube Talk Discord, and I wanted to give you my Foundations hot take. I think Kellan Planar Traveler or Planar Trailblazer, whatever the card's name is going to be a staple in all cubes that support efficient red 1-drops going forward. I think the ability to build your own Ragavan is really powerful, and especially give yourself double strike. So yeah, I would say it's not really a hot take. It's a lukewarm take that card is really good and we'll probably see a lot of play for a long time.
Hi everybody, this is Joe Anderson telling you about my favorite card from Foundations, Kellan, Planar Trailblazer. This crazy little cowboy boy is in the lore the son of Oko, but in mechanics the son of both Ragavan and Figure of Destiny. Like Figure, it levels up, but at instant speed, so you can, use it in a blue deck and hold up mana on your opponent's turn and then sink it into leveling him up instead. Or, more likely, use it in a red deck and figure out whether you want to use a burn spell for something or just sink some more mana into your cheap creature. He's great when you're flooding out in Boros or other red decks that don't draw a lot of cards. He's great when you have him early and your opponent doesn't have blockers and you can level him up and start getting in there with those Saboteur triggers, which we all know and love. He's very, very fun. I've played him in Foundations Draft at least 5 or 6 times at this point and never once felt bad about it. I do think he is less powerful than some cards from Modern Horizons and other straight-to-modern sets like Ragavan or Gut or a Johnny. But you know what? Not every card can be that good, and most cards shouldn't. So I would highly recommend him for any cube. I would make sure that you have a lot of mana in the decks that you're playing him. You don't want to be playing 15 lands and have to sink all that mana in and then need more mana to cast the cards. And he's both high risk and high reward, which is quite fun in most cards, in my opinion. If everything was boring and bland and medium in the middle, we would be playing chess, but instead we get to play Magic and go for the highest highs and the lowest lows. So if that's interesting to you, I highly suggest you grab a cowboy hat and giddy up, partner, and jump on a horse, my little cowboy twink, Kellan.
Okay, so our next card, the third most popular from the set, is Mischievous Mystic. It's 1 and a blue for a creature, human wizard. It's a flying 2/1. And whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a 1/1 blue fairy creature token with flying. This is tested by a little over a quarter of our respondents with an average rank of 6.8. Is it crazy to compare this to Young Pyromancer?
I don't think so. It's not that trigger is going to be that much harder to get in a lot of cubes. I think the biggest difference is the fact that you're only getting it once a turn.
That's true. The tokens are a little stronger.
And the creature itself is stronger. I mean, I think power level wise, It's actually pretty close, to be perfectly honest. In the most powerful cubes, there's often if you untap with Young Pyromancer, you make 4 tokens kind of play patterns, which is that kind of explosiveness is missing here. But you also very rarely get to attack or block with your Young Pyromancer because it's a 2/1 with no evasion. Whereas this, I think, will very often just be chipping in the sky while it's also making tokens.
Plus, if you have repeatable card draw, like you've got a Merfolk Looter in play, this is just going to make you a bunch of tokens without needing to actually have cards in hand.
Yeah.
The other comparison I want to draw between the two is that Young Pyromancer, sure, it cares about 2 different types of spell, but it doesn't care what those spells do. And so there's an open-endedness to deck building. If you're in a red-green deck, you could just play Rampant Growths and Shocks, and it will still trigger Young Pyromancer. If you're in a blue deck, you can go all in on the counter spells. Black decks might play Thoughtseize. So it doesn't restrict your deck building as much as it might seem. In the same way, Mischievous Mystic cares about a specific trigger, but it doesn't care where that comes from or what type of card. You could go big with up the beanstalk and draw cards every turn like that. Or you could do the small deck, small game cantrips and burn spells. And so I think the cards share that similarity from a deck building perspective, which I really like.
Yeah, I think this card is beautiful. And maybe Anthony talked a little bit about why he was excited about this for the regular cube, and I don't think I weighed in much because I was too focused on my own simple cube environment where this token is going to rule it out for my own consideration. But this card is great. It is so cool, so elegant. I think it is, like Young Pyromancer, going to scale a lot with the power level of the environment. I think this is going to be a strong card in the regular cube. I also think it would be a perfectly strong card in the Bun Magic cube if I were to play it there. I think it's just a really beautiful, elegant design. They can still make them. They can still make them, boys, in the year 2024. Good name, too.
love to see it.
Mischievous Mystic.
Yeah.
Good art. It's just great.
Foundations is like when your sweetie takes you out to a nice candlelit dinner and tells you all the things you've been waiting to hear. But then they excitedly inform you that they've been practicing with a ukulele band, and they're going to start dating that whole band in addition to you. Worse than that, there are 4 ukulele players, 6 songwriters, and a kazoo player. The kazoo player is Spider-Man, and he's going to be showing up to your birthday party. Something like that.
On to the second most popular card from Foundations. It is Alesha, Who Laughs at Fate. 1 black-red for a 2/2 legendary creature, human warrior. She's got first strike. Whenever Alesha attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And raid, at the beginning of your end step, if you attacked this turn, return target creature card with mana value less than or equal to Alesha's power from your graveyard to the battlefield. I had a long discussion with friend of the show, Ollie, organizer of Boston Cube Party and Cube Extraordinaire, about this card. Ollie is very down on triggers like this, comparing this to original Alesha. We talked about this a little bit when we touched on Kiora, the Rising Tide. Unlike original Alesha, who must attack, and then you pay, red-white hybrid to bring something back tapped and attacking, this Alesha can just sit back and not attack and accrue value. And I think Ollie's perspective that maybe some people share is that this kind of less risk or no risk design is something we've seen creeping in more and more to different cards. And the most direct comparison to this, I think, is like Brimaz compared to Adeline. Those cards are very similar in a lot of ways. I think the biggest difference is not the power scaling with creatures count, that does matter. I think the biggest difference is that Adeline triggers whenever you attack, and Brimaz triggers only when he attacks. I actually think this is a really interesting sort of design point to discuss, and maybe we'll come back to this on another episode, because I have some more thoughts I want to get into about it. But I think on this particular card, specifically, this is an incredibly elegant and beautiful implementation of this mechanic, because yes, you can just leave your 2/2 first striker back if you want and get back a 2-drop every turn, which is really strong. If you have other creatures you can throw into the fray, maybe sacrifice to a advantageous block for your opponent in exchange for getting something back, like this can just accrue value turn over turn. But you're also hugely motivated to attack with Alesha, because putting a +1/+1 counter on your first strike creature is a huge benefit. And then also it makes this raid trigger even stronger. So what it's doing is kind of, I think, offering incentives in both directions and allowing for a much sort of smoother texture of gameplay than if it was sort of all in. I find that the creatures that trigger only when you attack are oftentimes much more snowballing, right? If this offers you no advantage without attacking, then if you're behind, it's just a massively underrate card, and you're probably still more behind because you had to spend mana playing something massively underrate. If you go back to like original Alesha, right? If you can't afford to attack, then you're just playing a kind of poor rate blocker and not getting any additional advantage out of it. You're not getting why you put that card in your deck out of it. Whereas I think in this specific example, and we'll talk maybe about this broader pattern and with regards to other cards, in a future episode, but with this specific card example, with Alesha Who Laughs at Fate, I think it's a beautiful, elegant design that offers you incentives and rewards at different points of the game, whether you're ahead, whether you're behind, just works at every stage in a way that's really elegant.
Yeah, I agree that this is... I both agree with Ollie that sort of like cards that take that tension and that risk out of the decisions you're making are less appealing to me. But you're totally right that this, you do still want to attack with this because it's going to get more and more powerful the bigger you can get it, because then you can get bigger stuff out of your graveyard. I mean, this is not going to be surprising, but the fact that this plays with combat tricks is pretty cool to me. And the fact that this is like really low risk in the sense that this triggers even if it isn't in play when you attack, opens up like the cool possibility of I'll attack you with my 2-drop, trade in combat, and then I'll cast this, and at the end of turn, get my 2-drop back.
I see what you're saying. I thought you were saying if it like died, you would still get the trigger, and I'm like, no, you don't.
No.
I see what you're saying. Yes.
That is interesting. I agree that having this second ability, when it attacks, put a counter on it, brings back that tension that we like.
Right.
But I also want to mention, like, one of the reasons that tension is good from a cube design perspective, it might not be the thing you want as a player, but as the cube designer, 12 matches will be lost in the course of a 3-round cube night. And that means 12 often the same players are going to experience losing games and being behind. And having a card that is powerful like Alesha Who Laughs at Fate, but also puts herself at risk, provides counterplay. And so one reason Adeline could be frustrating, and I've seen her talked about as a frustrating card, is if she's strong, it's not always obvious how to interact with that or how to counterplay it. Obviously, yes, you want to remove it, but the window for removal is kind of small before she gets value. Not all removal works on a 4 toughness body. And if your deck's main game plan revolves around combat, Adeline doesn't have to enter combat, and so it can be frustrating to interact with. A card that puts itself at risk is a card that is easier to sideboard against. If Alesha is good against me in game 1 and beats me, now I know how to sideboard. I'll put in a 4/4 body or 2, and that will let me block Alesha profitably. Or I will put in a little bit of, combat tricks or other like basic effects and play around this. That kind of, I don't know, if the card didn't put itself at risk, it would be harder to sideboard against and contribute, I think, to possibly more frustrating losses. And that's something that I do care about a lot as a cube designer.
I don't want to get too deep down this rabbit hole because I do want to talk about this on a future episode, but I do have to just say that I think this idea that the frustrating games with Adeline are the ones where Adeline doesn't attack is just completely false. Like, it's 4 toughness, it's got vigilance. Adeline is always attacking. I've almost never seen a game. Sure. Like, maybe if you run a bunch of Death Touch in your cube is the one exception, but I think that Adeline is just frustrating for people because it's a hugely powerful card that just snowballs and takes over the game, not because it can sit back and not put itself at risk. Like, Adeline is just crushing your face with 8 power. That's why Adeline's frustrating. But like I said, that's, I think, a conversation for a future episode, perhaps.
You can't even race Adeline. That's the other issue with the vigilance. No, you can't race Adeline. Adeline too big. Yeah.
Yeah, the vigilance and 4 toughness is the offensive part of Adeline, by far, not the fact that it triggers when you attack instead of just when Adeline attacks, in my humble opinion.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough.
Hello everybody, my name is Trailblazer GT, and this is my second Foundations hot take. My cube, Highball 4K, is designed to feel like playing constructed Magic in the mid-2010s. While I like playing cards that existed back then, like Siege Rhino, Dig Through Time, and Stoke the Flames, it is very difficult to get the same exact constructed feel just using cards that existed in that era. Indeed, the power outliers from the time period are much better than the average cards. As a result, some mechanics and card types are less represented than they otherwise would be. To compensate for this, I like to use thematically appropriate cards that bolster the existing catalog. Cards like Murktide Regent and Heartfire Immolator use mechanics from the time period I'm trying to emulate and fit alongside some of these older cards very nicely. Foundations is added to this catalog by bringing back the raid mechanic, the original Marduk keyword from Khans of Tarkir. The new cards Searslicer Goblin and Alesha Who Laughs at Fate fit right in with some of their older counterparts. Searslicer Goblin feels like a mini Goblin Rabble Master that gives you value for attacking, while Alesha feels like a mechanical callback to her original card while tying in better with the Marduk clan mechanic. I am super happy that these cards exist, and I look forward to playing them in the future. Thanks for listening.
Finally, a simple card. I get to read it.
Yeah, you had some of the complicated ones, which is funny because you're the one that cares the most about the simple ones.
All right, so the number one card on our survey, according to you, the listeners, and other people that maybe submit surveys but don't listen because they don't like our voices, and that's okay, is Searslicer Goblin. It's 1 and a red for a Goblin Warrior. It's a 2/1, and it has raid at the beginning of your end step. If you attack this turn, create a 1/1 red Goblin creature token.
Blah, I can't believe this card doesn't have to risk itself to get value in combat. Blah, it's so broken. It has to make an attack.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for summarizing all my feelings. I think we can move on. This is being tested by a much more substantial number of people, almost 37% of the respondents, but again with a rating of only 6.9, so people are excited about it, but they're not over the moon about it. But I think it's a cool little card, except for, everything that you just said.
Okay, so first of all, I gotta say, this is also one I completely overlooked. I don't know how I did not notice this card. It is perfect for my cube that I've been working on, this new simple cube, so it's going right in there. I genuinely didn't see it until I looked at the results of this survey, so me, dumb. Do you actually feel that way about this card? This to me is the perfect example of why I think Ollie's complaint is actually about very specific card designs and not about this pattern overall. Because here, I think the fact that this card triggers whenever you attack is beautiful and perfect. And if this triggered only when it attacked, it would be much less interesting and much worse.
So the thing that... There's lots of things in the scales, and one of them for me with Raid in particular is it just forces you into combat in places that might not seem ideal. So, you might be wondering, like, why are you attacking with your 1/1 into my 2/2? Like, do you have a combat trick? Do I block here? And then it turns out, oh, you just want to be able to get these raid triggers.
That's a good thing for you, right?
To me, I think that's an interesting thing, that it just creates more complexity and opportunities for bluffing in combat. So, yeah, I mean, I do agree that it would be... I like if a card has to sort of put itself at risk. I also like the other aspects of raid, so it's kind of a wash to me on this card.
Well, the thing about raid is, like, this card isn't necessarily putting itself at risk, but it's forcing you to put other cards at risk. Like,
True.
You're not getting
Yes.
the benefit if you're not attacking. And I think all of these encouraging attacking mechanics all have the risk of potentially snowballing. If attacking is something you already wanted to be doing and now you just get this free gravy, you were already ahead, then that is something you have to consider. But I think this is a beautifully elegant card, and as a 2/1 that you would have to then untap with and attack with to get a single token, it would just not do the same thing. And I think you're still going to be attacking with this a ton of the time because you want to attack your opponent. You want to lower their life total. You're going to be encouraged for your aggression. But the fact that this also has another mode of, like, okay, do a little bit of a bluff attack. Maybe they don't block because they're worried about a combat trick. Then I get a free token that I can block with, after combat. These things, assuming you didn't have this in play. Obviously, this is in play. They're going to see that coming. But the fact that the raid trigger doesn't happen until end step, so you can play the second main phase and still get that raid trigger. It's going to open up so many more interesting lines of play. And these are like the paradigm cards for me, where it's got such a simple line of rules text, but it opens up so much interesting opportunity for how you can put that line of rules text to use in a game. And I think if this were worded differently, and you could even change the rate. Like, I'm saying it's stronger. Obviously, it's stronger if it's whenever you attack, but make this a 2/2 or even a 2/2 first strike, but only when it attacks. I think that card is so much less interesting than this card that triggers whenever you attack, period.
I think that's a good point. I also think it's worth saying that, we've had some criticisms of cards that don't risk themselves, but we're starting from the baseline of raid as the keyword, raid being one of my favorite mechanics of all time, one of the mechanics that I trust the most to lead to the kinds of games of Magic I want to see. Synergies that reach out to the players that I want to reach out to, encourage people to attack, encourage people to build decks that commit to the board. I love that stuff. And even though Searslicer Goblin, you could make the argument that if you attacked is worse than when this attacks, fair enough. I tend to believe and agree with what you were saying, Andy, that this particular design is better this way. But even if you disagree, we're starting from the baseline of raid being a super healthy, super awesome mechanic, and I love to see this card.
I can't believe I missed this one when I was reviewing the set. I don't know how I missed it. It's cheap, it's flexible, simple mechanically, it's beautiful. I love it.
I'm also going to test it in at least one of my cubes. Maybe I'll pick up 2 copies because I'm also working on a more evergreen or throwbacky cube in terms of complexity.
All the cool cube designers are working on simple cubes these days. It's the new thing to be doing.
I've been doing simple cubes since before it was cool.
I know, we're all chasing Anthony. Anthony's the true trendsetter.
I kind of hate the term simple cube. This is germane because one of the Foundation set designers, I think it was Carmen Clomperens, talked recently about how they weren't going for simple with Foundations. They were going for cards that are appealing, cards that bring new coming Magic players, whether they're coming from Commander or from, starting from scratch, bringing them into an understanding of more complex and more appealing Magic designs. And so simple, sure, that's part of it, but it's not just about simplicity. I mean, that's the difference between Foundations and Core Set 2012. Foundations is trusting Magic players to intuit and understand the appeal of synergies and to kind of bring them deeper into an understanding of the game.
Yeah, I don't know a better way to summarize that because
I know it's tough.
It has so much, and that's why my quote unquote simple cube, I don't have any hard rules for myself, right? I'm not limiting it to word count. I'm not limiting it to only evergreen mechanics. It's just things that I think are resonant and elegant. The few places I am drawing fairly hard lines for myself are around practical things. I don't want to have 60 different tokens in the token box. I think it's much more elegant holistically as a whole cube if you don't have 2 things each making different white 1/1 creature tokens, right? That's just weird and not that elegant in a big perspective, even if the individual cards making those tokens can be elegant. So yeah, I think that sort of maybe indescribable or, hard to capture aspect is what I'm chasing with that cube project. And it's not simplicity, right? I mean, simplicity is highly correlated, I think, with it. Like, there shouldn't be extraneous rules text. That's one of the things that's very important to me. I don't want stuff that doesn't matter or, only matters 2% of the time. But I'm also willing to put in complicated cards or cards that are wordy if those words are contributing to a cohesive game piece, right? Like, if I was going based on word count, Sphinx of the Forgotten Lore is pretty wordy, right? Like, it's not the simplest card, but it does, I think, contribute to an overall elegant, resonant, grokkable game piece, and that's what's important to me.
I agree.
Hi, this is Joe Donkey with a hot take on Magic Foundations. I've heard a lot of people saying that they really like the simpler card designs, and I feel that, but I also don't feel as fully positive about this set just because so much of the set was reprints. They didn't actually make that many new cards. Something like 130 out of the 470 were actually new designs. And not all of those were that simple. There were some really complex cards, a lot with just a super full text box or with 3 or more separate abilities, often that all interact with each other. And to me, that's not kind of the clean, simple design I was hoping for. So I hope that Wizards isn't saying, hey, we did it, we made a simple set, now let's go crazy with all the other sets in the next year. And hopefully we'll see some more of the cool, simple designs that are in this set.
Those were the top 8 of Foundations, but there was also Foundations Jumpstart, which we've also published a survey on and published an article about. So we have slightly fewer respondents for this supplemental set that is, I don't even know if these are standard legal, but nonetheless, for supplemental sets, we tend to get fewer responders. That's no surprise here. However, there is one card in particular that is somewhat notable from this set, which is Scythecat Cub. So this was the most popular card from Jumpstart 25, or maybe it's called Foundations Jumpstart. It was tested by almost 40% of our respondents for Jumpstart 25, with an average rank of 6.9. So Scythecat Cub is 1 and a green for a 2/2 cat creature. It has trample and it has landfall. The landfall trigger is whenever a land you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. If this is the second time this ability has resolved this turn, double the number of 1/1 counters on that creature instead. Yeah, so we have a hot take to this effect, and I'm actually inclined to largely agree with Trainmaster GT here.
Okay, this is Trainmaster GT again, and I've got one more hot take for Foundations. I absolutely hate the card Scythecat Cub. This card is a throwback to everything I disliked about the mid-2010s. First off, the card is a little bit needlessly complex. Well, it has a pretty simple ability of adding a counter to a creature whenever you play a land. Specifically, the second time you do it, you get to double the counters on the thing you're putting the second counter on, which is just a little bit confusing, I think, at times, and it makes what is an otherwise pretty simple card read like a very complicated one for basically no reason. The art and flavor are reminiscent of Battle for Zendikar, which in my opinion is the worst block of the 2010s. It just feels sterile and soulless. The thing is, I'm not sure I'd really have a huge problem with this card if it weren't for the fact that we just got Bristly Bill Spine Sower like 6 months ago, who has a cleaner templating, is more aesthetically pleasing, and is arguably just a better card. Like, sure, the Scythecat Cud's a cat, which could be relevant if Cat Zoo ends up being a thing, but so far, really the only payoff for that's the new Ajani. Like, just in general, I don't think this card is bad, but it's not something I'd be going out of my way to play, especially because it's just $40 for some reason. 0 of 10, would not recommend.
This is very similar to Bristly Bill. And, it's a snowballing threat, similar to Luminarch Aspirant, similar to Innkeeper's Talent, I think it is, but also has this weird inelegance of the second time this ability has resolved this turn, which is, I don't know, to me, a little bit of a corny reference to fetch lands, and the doubling the number of counters is just, I don't know, it's not something that I'm wild about.
I think it's really inelegant. I actually really strongly dislike it for a couple of reasons, even beyond what Trainmaster GT said in his hot take. Obviously, there's yeah, okay, let's say I have just this in play. The first time I get a +1/+1 counter on it. The second time I double them, which is effectively exactly the same as getting another +1/+1 counter. It just is done in a different way. That's kind of the baseline of it being inelegant. It's also a bit of a nerf. I can't just put one counter on two separate creatures. Like the second time I get the trigger, I have to choose a creature that already has counters on it to put additional counters on. I can't just start distributing counters around the board. And also, it's only the second time. The third, fourth, fifth time this happens, you go back to the first one. And the fact that it's a replacement effect on the second time, not like put a counter on it, then double them or something, which obviously would be a lot more powerful, but at least would like not completely change that original trigger to be something different. I think it's honestly like incredible how inelegant they managed to make this, given how simple it seems like they were going for this card to be. I would love this card if it was just put a counter on something on landfall. That would be so exciting to me, but it's not that, and I think it is quietly a really clunky not that.
Yeah. However, it's powerful, and I do think that's a reason that we're seeing so much excitement around this card.
Yeah, I mean, for what that extra ability is there for, I guess it's like this exciting dream to live. But if I'm going for that, I would love to be like, oh, I'm going to like build up until this one turn where I, play a fetch land, crack it, and then cast a rampant growth and like double it 3 times in one turn. That would be like an exciting payoff, but then it doesn't even do that. So I agree with all of these things.
Yeah, it'd be a lot better if it was worded, unless this is the first time this happened this turn. Like on all subsequent triggers, double it. Like, sure, at least then getting your third landfall turn is genuinely hard in almost every environment. Like it's worth sequencing around. But the fact that this just goes back to putting a single counter on it is it's very silly to me.
Hello, Bones here, and I'm going to abandon my normally calm demeanor to go on a bit of a rant about Foundations. Ashroot Animist is a 2 red and a green lizard druid. Its abilities are irrelevant to this rant. It costs 4 mana in red-green and is a lizard. 2 sets ago, we were taught that raccoons care about 4 mana and are red-green, and lizards are black-red and are low-curving. Why do we have a 4 mana red-green lizard? The art is pretty cool. My second complaint is about Foundations Jumpstart, and is probably more predictable. We got so many cool legends, like Ivora Insatiable Air, or Evora, I don't know. She's very cool. She has cool abilities that work really well with some of my cubes. And her only art is anime. And that's the case for all the legends in this Jumpstart set. It's anime art, all the way down. And in the past, we have gotten anime art, alternate art for cards, and then regular art for cards. But this time, on these mechanically unique legends, only anime art. And I'm very disappointed. That's all.
The other thing I think is worth mentioning about the Jumpstart product is that there is a big swath, I won't even call it a cycle because it's a huge number of cards, of legendary creatures, I think entirely at uncommon, if I'm not mistaken. No, there's some rares too, I lied. Legendary creatures that only have this sort of anime-style art treatment. It's not an alt art treatment. There is no non-anime art. It is just, that is what these creatures all look like. Does anyone know why this is the case? Did anyone see in a stream or read an article somewhere as to why they were making this decision?
It's because Magic players are otakus and into waifus, I guess.
I mean, look, it's not to my taste for this game. I imagine there's a lot of players out there that are really excited about these. The other thing I want to point out is that we heard from multiple people, both in hot takes and also anecdotally online, that are just straight up ignoring all of these cards because they don't aesthetically fit with their cube's design goals. They feel like they don't belong in the game. I think on that spectrum I mentioned earlier, from SpongeBob to Lightning Bolt and a core set, they're definitely 2/3 of the way to SpongeBob. Like, they don't really feel like a Magic card in a lot of the ways that I feel like we have to be pretty vigilant now for like what constitutes a Magic card as far as our own cube environments are concerned. Some of these are very mechanically interesting, I think, and the one that scores highest on the survey amongst these cards is the second most popular card. It's called Evora Insatiable Air. It's a cool thing with the discard matters sort of payoff and +1/+1 counters. I honestly think the reason it is up here, though, is that the art is a little more ambiguous. It is very clearly still in that sort of more illustrative anime style, but the way it's composed, it just makes it much less clear until you look like directly at the character's face that it is not a more sort of... It's less stylistically in this sort of vein as the other ones. And I think more of these cards would be higher up there if not for the fact that the art is just a very strong flavor that is going to definitely not be compatible with some people's vision of what Magic is about.
And the weird thing is, Jumpstart, yes, it has this anime art for these often, it appears, legendary creatures, but then it also updates art for just like weirdly vanilla cards. We've got new Banishing Light art, which is extremely abstract and expressive.
That Banishing Light art is so sick. I love it.
Yeah, we've got new art for Mentor of the Meek, which is in a lot of cubes, I think. We've got new art for Ninja of the Deep Hours, which is now cyberpunk to fit with the Neon Dynasty style. We've got new Dark Confidant art, which is actually kind of banging.
Very, very good. And I think the first femme presenting Dark Confidant we've ever had, so very cool there too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but this is
Deadly
alongside
Dispute.
Erdnan Dramoka Warrior, and this art is just, boy, it looks like a cheapo anime from like the late 90s. Like, it's not even good anime art. It's like really rough.
Gutter Snipes in here, Kiln Fiend's in here. I'm just scrolling through now. Llanowar Elves has a new art. So I don't know. It's worth checking out. Obviously, it's extremely well presented on Scryfall, so worth scrolling through, I think. See if something, strikes your fancy, even if the anime isn't your thing.
Some of these are really strange. Like there's apparently a new illustration for Naban Dean of Iteration, but it's exactly the same composition, just like animeified.
It honestly, like, people are going to get triggered when I say this. It almost seems like they gave the original art to like an AI and were like, do this anime style. Like, it has that quality to me of being like...
Or like a Photoshop filter.
Yeah, it is. It's rough.
It's really not to my taste.
The Banishing Light, though. Do you see like the sort of pixely artifacts in the top left corner of the Banishing Light art that are part of the actual art itself? It's so sick.
That's cool. This Dark Confidant is very cool.
Yeah, I'm just filtering by new art now. And
just listen to a couple of guys looking at art on Scryfall. Biogenic Upgrade, that's pretty cool.
This sure is an audio medium.
Hey, Lucky Paper, my name is Paul, and today my burden to carry is that I'm here to defend a sexy merfolk anime card. That's where the day finds me. I am, of course, talking about Neardiv, Devious Diver. This is 2 and a blue for a 2/2 with whenever Neardiv becomes tapped, target player mills cards equal to its power. And then whenever you cast a spell from your graveyard or activate an ability of a card in your graveyard, you draw a card and put a +1/+1 counter on Neardiv. So you're here, you're listening to a Cube podcast. That means you are a blue mage. It's the law. So I don't think I really have to go too deep in the explanations of why this card is sick as hell. We love drawing cards. We love casting spells from our graveyard. There are 10,000 cards with a mechanic that does something from your graveyard. We're talking Embalm, Eternalize, Aftermath. That's just one block. One block. We've got Scavenge. You can cast Slitherhead for 0 mana and draw a card. Oh my god. And yes, at first glance, this is a kind of classic self-enabling commander bait. Do thing, draw card. But I think in 1v1, there's a kind of a puzzle in getting your 2/2 through combat or tapping or some other way. And that makes it interesting. I also think she scales pretty well with whatever power level you're working with. Personally speaking, I just want to get extra value when I nerf my Scrapbook mod. That's really all I ask for. But if you're doing something degenerate, you can storm off by chaining retrace spells or with Underworld Breach or something. So that's cool. But I got a confession to make, which is that the only reason I'm here defending this card is because I think my 7-year-old brain was permanently warped when I opened a pack of Yu-Gi-Oh cards in like 2001, and there was the card Mermaid Archer, and like this girl with a clam shooting you, and that like destroyed me. So I was looking through the spoilers for Jumpstart couple days ago, and I saw Neardiv, and it was like that scene with Anton Ego and Ratatouille where he's eating the ratatouille, and he's transported. I was sitting there in front of the screen, so this is my Thursday.
Speaking of which, Anthony, you mentioned Goblin Face earlier, and I think we're going to need something in the show notes to illustrate what you're talking about.
Oh, well, we can link directly to you see a pair of goblins.
No, we need a picture of Anthony making a goblin
me
face.
making a goblin. I
Clearly.
don't do
He
goblin
didn't
face.
say he was making a goblin face. New Ash Barons art, new Terramorphic Expanse art. Yeah, I don't know. Very interesting decisions made by the art direction team for this set. But yeah, I mean, some people can really new Raise the Alarm art. Like, yeah, funny.
Things that make you go,
One last interjection for this episode. I'm listening back to this conversation in the editing booth, and in hindsight, it almost seems kind of obvious to me that this whole thing was maybe an attempt to get a specific art treatment onto a bunch of very iconic, popular cards, like all the ones we've just named. And to be clear, the non-legendary creatures are not as anime-y as the other cards, but we're speaking from our particular cultural perspective. For all I know, the anime cards are very popular, not just among a certain audience, but perhaps in certain regions. Maybe in Japan, these cards are much more beloved than they are here in the States. It seems like a conscious effort, though, that Wizards is making, and, it's not for us to speculate as to what that reason is. We can only weigh in from our perspective and speak to how these cards do or do not comport with our vision for the game, but I just want to sort of acknowledge this is maybe a sort of collective cultural blind spot for us in interpreting the sort of purpose behind these new art treatments. And this concludes the things that make us go, for Foundations. This has been our Foundations Community Set Review. Parker, you're also on Blue Sky. Are you planning on posting over there? Are you going to actually invest some time in this social media, or not so much?
I will post about as often as I posted on Twitter, which is not a lot, but I will post, especially when we make articles. So I'll probably post about Foundations. And then if you want to stay in the loop and catch maybe some of the, more cube design focused or theory focused articles that we publish moving forward, that's a good place to find out.
Anthony, you put some more cool features on the website this week. Do you want to mention them to people?
I did, yeah. So I've been working a little bit more on the list formatter, which, one day maybe I'll think of a better name for it that isn't just like totally bland and descriptive, but that's what the thing is. So you can now generate composite images from cards. So if you have a list of cards that you want either in a deck layout or you want to post a pack one, pick one from a set of cards, you can make one image out of them. I also built a new little app, which I'm calling, in line with my great naming, the List Differ. And this is just a page where you can put in two lists of cards and it'll tell you what cards are unique to each list and what cards are shared in each, or shared in both lists. You can also, instead of pasting in a list, paste in a link to your cube on Cube Cobra or a Scryfall search. So if you want to do other stuff like, I want to be able to get a list of all the new Foundations cards that I put in my cube so that I can put that into my bulk order to buy these cards, you can do that.
List Differ, I barely know her.
Thank you, Dr. Parker.
Got him. This is a funny bear here. This purple bear, Herska Sweet Tooth. Check out the List Differ. Check out the list formatter. It might be hard to picture what these things can do from hearing descriptions of them on a podcast, but if you ever find yourself doing repetitive tasks with a list of Magic cards, chances are Anthony has built a tool to make that repetitive task more simple and straightforward for you. So check them out on our resources page, along with all of our other great resources. We keep updating the Cube events page. It feels like every week there's a new Cube event announced, and the Salt Box, as of yesterday, sold out. So we got a sold-out event here in Baltimore coming up this spring. There's a wait list for that, so if you miss buying a ticket, you can get on the wait list, and maybe some will get freed up, or maybe we get a little more space. We'll see.
We've also got a Cube event coming to Philly, which is where I'm based. It's going to be in January. It's called Vertex Philly, so you can find that on the Lucky Paper events page, or just probably by Googling.
We'll also put a link in the show notes directly to it, and I'll be there. You're going to be
great.
Vertex Philly, Anthony?
I think so.
Anthony and I will be there. It's going to be great. There's all kinds of Cube events coming up and down the East Coast and elsewhere, so check out luckypaper.co/events.
Should we spoil or tease our next book report, book club?
Yeah, did we officially decide? Are we in? Are we going to announce that now?
Yeah, we had a whole meeting.
We did have a meeting. It was just brief, and I wanted to make sure everyone, felt good about our decisions from that meeting.
I've got all the time in the world now.
Honestly, we should have started this a long time ago because it takes time to read them. But we did our book club this past year where we talked about The Beauty of Games by Frank Lance and then had a review episode about it. And overall, I would say the response was fairly positive. People were like, yes, do some more of this. And we should have decided sooner, but we only just decided this past week that the next book club book is going to be Playing Oppression. It was recommended by a couple of listeners in response to the first book club episode, so it is going to be thematic a little bit, following up with The Beauty of Games with Playing Oppression. I'll put a link in the show notes to a independent bookseller where you can get a copy of Playing Oppression if you want to read along before we record an episode about it, though, as we did with the beauty of games, I'm sure we will basically record the episode so that you can still get something out of it, even if you did not read the book. And I expect that, we're going through the holiday season, so it's a good time for people to get some extra reading done, and we'll definitely not be talking about this any sooner than January, so you've got until the new year to read Playing Oppression.
The authors are Mary Flanagan and Michael Jacobson.
Thank you for having
Just
that
so you
handy,
can find
Parker.
it easier.
I did not have it handy, so thank you for having that pulled up.
Of course.
And on that note, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. If we or any of the hot take submitters got any card text wrong on this episode that was intentional to bait engagement, don't fall for it. All the music for this show is produced by DJ James Nasty. All the Magic cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast. This podcast is produced by Thinking Really Hard About Magic Cards and Speaking to Microphones about it. Anthony and Parker, thank you for the gift of friendship and for the gift of Cube.
Thank you for talking about this new set with me, and thank you, Parker, for all of the exciting JavaScript that you're going to write in this new year.
Thank you. Thank you both for building such a strong foundation to our friendship.
Appreciate you, buddy.
Foundations is like when your beau takes you out. No, sweetie. We'll say sweetie. Okay. Foundations is like when your sweetie takes you out to a nice candlelit dinner, only to excitedly inform you that they've been practicing with a ukulele band and they're going to start dating their bandmates in addition to you. Worst of all, the band has 6 ukuleles, 4 songwriters, and a kazoo player. Oh no, it closed. Foundations is just like when your sweetie takes you out to a nice candlelit dinner. It's everything you've wanted to hear from them. But now they excitedly inform you that they've been practicing with a ukulele band. God damn it.